I knew the moment I stepped through the doorway that coming home for my 27th birthday had been a mistake. 3 months away from the Thompson house had given me enough space to pretend I was no longer the family punching bag. But the second I crossed the threshold, the air tightened around me like an old chokehold. My father Derek sat at the head of the dining table with a half-empty beer chin tilted in the smug way he reserved for occasions when he expected an audience. My brother Blake leaned against the counter beside the store-bought cake, his arms crossed and his eyes gleaming with something sharp. Linda moved around to the table, arranging plates like a nervous stagehand, and whispered a faint hello without ever looking directly at me. The whole room felt rehearsed. I told myself I could survive one dinner. It was my birthday after all, and despite everything, a part of me hoped for something gentler than the bitterness I had known my entire life. Derek raised his bottle the moment I sat down and announced that we should get the celebration going. His voice boomed loud enough for the neighbors to hear, and he insisted Linda bring out the cake even though we had not eaten yet. She lit the candles with trembling hands and pushed the cake toward me while Derek smirked as if he were holding a secret between his teeth. "Make a wish," he said, and his tone made clear it was not a suggestion. I leaned forward because refusing would have turned the moment uglier, and before I even inhaled, Derek lifted his bottle and said, "Here is to Ava making it to 27. Not bad for another man's mistake." For one full second, no one breathed. Then Blake laughed, first loud and satisfied, and the sound cracked open the room. Linda bowed her head and whispered, "Derek, please," but she did not say it loud enough to matter. Heat rushed through my face so fast I could barely see the candles flickering inches from my eyes. The humiliation tasted metallic on my tongue. I pushed back from the table ready to leave when Blake stepped in front of the doorway with a grin that told me he had been waiting for this moment. "Hold on," he said. "You have not opened my surprise." He pulled a white envelope from his jacket and held it out like a winning lottery ticket. My stomach dropped before I even touched it. "Open it," he insisted. Inside was a printed DNA report with my name typed neatly across the top. The realization hit me all at once. Blake had taken something of mine when I moved out months ago, probably my toothbrush or a stray hair, and sent it for testing. "Now we finally know why Dad never liked you," he said, and his grin widened as if cruelty were a form of oxygen. Derek stood from his chair and walked toward me slowly like he wanted to make sure every eye in the room stayed on him. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder and gave a small shove, not enough to send me flying, but enough to force me off balance and enough to make sure everyone saw it. "No point pretending anymore," he said. A low murmur of approval passed around the table from relatives who had barely spoken to me all evening. I felt the familiar ache that came from years of being treated like an outsider in the house where I grew up. But tonight it landed differently, heavier, sharper, as if some truth I had never wanted to touch was finally tearing its way to the surface. I moved past Blake without another word and pushed open the front door. The night air hit me like a slap, and I breathed hard, trying to steady myself. Behind me, through the thin walls, I heard Derek mutter to Blake, "Tomorrow we finish what we started. She is not getting a damn thing from me." I kept walking because stopping would have meant collapsing. Every step toward my car felt like dragging chains, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I reached the driveway with tears burning my eyes, yet refused to let any of them fall. Behind me, I heard Derek mutter something about ungrateful children and wasted years, but his words sounded distant, as if spoken underwater. I opened my car door with shaking hands and told myself I would never let them corner me again. People like to say that childhood shapes you, but what they never mention is that sometimes it shapes you into someone you spend years trying to unlearn. My earliest memories are stitched together with the kind of small hurts that children are expected to forget, though they sink deeper than anyone admits. I remember Blake pushing me down the stairs when I was 7 and calling it a joke while Derek told me to stop being dramatic. I remember being locked outside one winter night when I was 9 because I forgot to scrub the mud off my shoes before walking through the kitchen. Derek claimed it was to teach me responsibility, and Blake laughed through the window as I pounded on the door, begging to be let in. When I finally stumbled back inside, shivering so hard my teeth hurt, Derek tossed me a thin blanket and said maybe cold will teach you what your brain clearly cannot. Back then, I still believed I could earn his approval if I tried hard enough. I brought home perfect attendance certificates and honor roll ribbons and even a county science award he never commented on. Blake came home with detention slips and broken knuckles from fights behind the gym, yet Derek celebrated him as if he were winning Olympic medals. "You are the tough one," he told Blake. "You are the real Thompson." Every time he said it, Blake looked at me with triumph, because the unspoken part of the sentence hung heavy between us. I was not the real anything. My mother was the only person who ever pushed back against Derek's cruelty, and even she did it quietly. She slipped warm meals into my room when Derek refused to let me eat at the table. She brushed my hair at night while singing softly in a way that made the world feel briefly safe. But she also walked on eggshells around Derek because his temper could go from simmering to boiling in seconds. I learned to read the signs, the clench of his jaw, the way he drained his glass faster than usual, the hush that fell over the house when footsteps grew heavy. My mother died when I was 10, and even now I can still feel how the air changed the instant she left us. Her funeral happened on a rainy Tuesday, and I spent most of it staring at the door, half expecting her to walk back in and restore balance. Derek stood stiff and untouched by grief, offering polite nods to neighbors. Blake kicked my chair twice during the service and whispered the wrong one died. When Linda entered our lives a year later, she did not come as a villain in the way my child self expected. She was quiet and skittish and wore apologetic smiles like armor. She never insulted me, not directly, but she also never intervened when Derek barked orders or when Blake called me stray dog. She simply looked away as if silence were the most she could offer, and maybe it was. Maybe survival had taught her the same vigilance that guided me. Growing up in that house felt like living in a war zone where the rules changed every day. Derek believed discipline meant dominance, and Blake learned early that cruelty won him praise. Once when I was 12, Blake cornered me in the garage and shoved me against the shelves until my arm bruised. He said, "Dad thinks you are worthless, and I am just proving his point." Later, Derek saw the bruise and said nothing except, "Next time, keep your distance." School became my only refuge. I stayed late for tutoring and spent weekends at the library pretending I had assignments that required silence. Teachers praised me for being hardworking, but they never realized I stayed because going home meant stepping into a place where love was conditional and survival required obedience. When I graduated high school with academic honors, Derek did not attend the ceremony. He said he had a delivery route that paid extra and could not be bothered. Blake bragged about skipping it to drink with friends. I stood on the stage, clutching my diploma, pretending their absence did not matter. I earned a scholarship to study medical imaging, though Derek called it a useless degree for girls who think too much. But the moment I stepped into my first anatomy lab, something inside me softened. For the first time, I could remember someone valued my mind instead of resenting it. I became an ultrasound technician, not because it impressed anyone, but because it allowed me to see parts of life invisible to most people. Each heartbeat flickering across the screen reminded me that possibility existed even when hope felt thin. When I moved out at 24, Derek told me not to bother coming back unless I had something to offer. 3 months ago, I did return briefly, only to discover Derek had been meeting with a realtor behind my back. The house that once belonged to my mother was legally co-owned by her estate, and by law, I had rights to it. Derek did not care. Blake did not care. They planned to sell it and claim I never contributed a cent. When I confronted Derek, he called me ungrateful and told me the world owed me nothing. Our argument turned heated enough that neighbors peered through their blinds. Blake stepped between us with a smile that made my skin crawl and whispered, "Run while you still can." I left that night with only 2 suitcases and the sense that something larger than a family rift was unfolding. For 3 months, I rented a room near the hospital, holding on to the hope that distance would cool their fury. I convinced myself that maybe Derek would calm down and Blake would get bored of tormenting me. But the moment I walked into that birthday dinner, I realized I had underestimated them. Their hatred had not cooled at all. It had sharpened and taken shape and was now pointed directly at me. The morning after the birthday disaster felt unreal, like my life had cracked open and I was walking through the pieces trying not to bleed. I barely slept, drifting in and out of dreams where Derek's voice echoed another man's mistake and Blake's grin hovered above the envelope he forced into my hands. By the time my alarm went off, I felt hollow, but going to work was the only thing keeping me from sinking completely. At least the hospital had rules. At least pain there had purpose. I arrived earlier than usual, hoping to slip inside unnoticed, but the moment I stepped out of my car, an uneasy sensation crawled up my spine. The parking lot was quiet, except for the hum of distant traffic and the rhythmic beeping of a delivery truck backing up near the loading dock. The air smelled like cold asphalt and antiseptic drifting from the main entrance. I locked my car and adjusted my badge when a shadow detached itself from the row of vehicles ahead. Blake stepped into view, as if he had been waiting for me the entire night. My breath caught. He wore the same jacket from the birthday dinner, and his expression held no trace of guilt or hesitation. He looked energized, like humiliating me had added fuel to whatever fire he carried. "Morning, sis," he said lightly, as if this were a casual visit. "We need to talk." I tried walking past him, but he moved sideways, blocking my path with the ease of someone who had rehearsed it. The hospital was only 50 feet away, its automatic doors glowing under the fluorescent lights, but somehow they felt miles out of reach. Blake stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You really pissed Dad off last night. You should not have run out like that." My pulse thudded in my ears. Last night he humiliated me in front of a room full of people, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am done playing along." Blake chuckled softly. "You think that was humiliation, Ava? That was preparation. Dad has plans, and you walking around acting like you are entitled to anything is messing with them." I swallowed hard. "I have rights. Mom left that house partly to me." Blake's jaw tightened before his smile snapped back into place. "That house is ours. Dad and I have put in the work. You left. You do not get to waltz back in and claim ownership. That is not how family works." My laugh came out shaky. "Family," I repeated. "You mean the people who stole my DNA and tested it behind my back? You mean the people who spent my birthday proving I do not belong?" Blake's eyes flickered, and for a moment I saw something sharper than cruelty. Fear. He stepped closer until his shadow swallowed mine and grabbed my wrist. His fingers dug into the soft skin near my thumb, and pain shot up my arm. I tried pulling away, but he squeezed harder. "Listen to me," he hissed. "If you go after anything Dad owns, if you even think about contesting the estate, I will make sure you regret it. You work in a hospital, right? Lots of chances for mistakes. Lots of ways a career can end quickly." The threat landed cold and heavy. I stared at him, searching for the brother I once hoped existed beneath the rage, but there was nothing. Only emptiness held together by spite. "Let go of me," I said, and my voice cracked but did not break. Blake leaned closer. "I will when I know you understand. Stay out of our way. Sign whatever paperwork Dad sends. No lawyers, no arguments. That house will not be yours. Nothing Dad built will be yours." I forced myself not to look away. "You are terrified," I said quietly. "Otherwise, you would not be here threatening me in a parking lot like a coward." His grip tightened painfully, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he shoved my hand downward and released me so abruptly that I stumbled back. "Fine," he said. "Do what you want, but remember, I gave you a chance to walk away clean." It was like a switch flipped in him. He straightened his jacket, stepped back into the shadow of a nearby SUV, and muttered pathetic under his breath. Then he walked away without looking back. My hand pulsed in sharp throbs, and already I could see a red mark forming across my wrist. I let out a shaky breath and looked up at the nearest security camera, mounted high on the light pole. Its small red recording indicator blinked steadily. Relief washed through me. He had no idea he just incriminated himself on hospital property. I turned toward the entrance, trying to steady my breathing. The doors parted with a soft whoosh, and the sterile scent of disinfectant spilled out like a familiar embrace. Inside, my coworkers greeted me with warm smiles and soft laughter, and for a moment I almost believed I could pretend everything was normal. but every time I lifted my hand, the ache reminded me it was not. The humiliation from last night had followed me into daylight and sharpened itself into something darker. Blake was not acting alone. Derek had whispered tomorrow we finish what we started. They were planning something, and whatever it was, they believed they could force me into compliance. For most of my life, they had been right. For most of my life, fear had kept me quiet. But standing there in the hallway with my wrist throbbing and the memory of Blake's threat echoing in my ears, I felt something shift. They were no longer simply cruel. They were dangerous. And for the first time, I realized I needed help. Real, legal help. I could not fight them alone. Not anymore. That night after my shift, I drove back to the small room I rented behind an aging duplex, a place that smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon cleaner, but at least belonged to no one who wished me harm. My wrist still throbbed from where Blake grabbed me, a shadow of his fingers lingering like a brand I had carried in different forms my whole life. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the bruising forming in soft purple arcs, and for a long moment I let the exhaustion settle over me. Every part of me wanted to collapse, but something sharp and restless pressed through the fog. Derek's words from the night before lingered. "Tomorrow we finish what we started." His voice carried certainty, like the plan already existed, and my role in it was predetermined. I needed to understand what they were trying to push me out of. I needed to understand why Blake went to the trouble of getting my DNA behind my back. Fear mixed with anger, and the combination tasted bitter enough to make me stand. I crossed the room to the narrow closet where I kept the only box that still connected me to my mother. I had not opened it in years, partly because I feared what memories might spill out, and partly because Derek always acted like her belongings were his property alone. When I first moved out, I grabbed the box in a rush, shoving it into my trunk before anyone noticed. Tonight, something told me the answers I needed might be inside. The box was old and worn around the corners from years of being dragged from one hiding place to another. I pulled it down and carried it to the floor, sitting cross-legged like a child opening a secret treasure. The cardboard creaked softly as I lifted the lid. Inside were pieces of her life preserved in mismatched layers, a pressed flower she kept between her books, a ticket stub from a concert she dragged me to when I was 8, a recipe card in her handwriting with chocolate stains smudged across the corner. For a moment, the ache of missing her dulled everything else. I ran my fingers along the curve of her cursive and pictured her standing at the kitchen counter, humming as she baked bread on Sundays. She had been light in a house full of shadows. I pushed deeper into the box, lifting an old scarf, then a small journal filled with half-written thoughts about healing and motherhood. Near the bottom, something caught my eye. A thin, manila envelope curled at the edges, as if someone had opened it hastily and shoved it away. The flap was not sealed. My pulse quickened. I pulled it out and felt a strange weight inside, not heavy but meaningful. I slid my fingers beneath the flap and opened the envelope. A photograph slid into my hand. It was a glossy print, faded slightly with age, showing my mother holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pale blanket. She looked young, younger than I had ever seen her in pictures. Her face glowed with a softness I could not remember her ever showing once she married Derek. But it was not her expression that stole my breath. It was the man standing beside her, tall with kind eyes, dark hair, and a hand resting lightly on my mother's shoulder. I did not recognize him. Not a neighbor, not a family friend, not someone who had ever been mentioned. My chest tightened. I flipped the photo over and saw 2 words written in my mother's handwriting. "Forgive me." The words struck harder than any blow Blake had ever delivered. Forgive me. Forgive what? Forgive who she chose. Forgive the life she gave me. Forgive the truth she hid, or something else entirely. The room felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls leaned inward with the weight of revelation. Questions crowded my mind until they blurred together, but beneath them all ran a simple thread of understanding. This man was important. Important enough for my mother to write a message she never had the courage to speak aloud. Important enough to be hidden away. Heat prickled behind my eyes, and I pressed the photo to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. I remembered being 5 years old and overhearing Derek tell someone that raising another man's mess was charity. My mother had shushed him quickly, sending me to the other room, but the sting of those words lingered in my memory. Another man's mess. I had always assumed he was being cruel for cruelty's sake. But now, maybe I had been wrong. I slid the photograph back into the envelope and reached again into the box. This time, my fingers brushed against a folded document tucked beneath the scarves. It looked like a hospital form yellowed at the edges. I unfolded it carefully. It was a birth record. My birth record. Mother's name, Laura Thompson. Father's name left blank. My hands shook slightly. I had never seen this version before. The copy Derek kept at home always listed him as my father. The edges of my world shifted unexpectedly. Derek had been listed as my father by choice, not by fact. My mother had hidden that truth from me. Blake had unearthed it for his own gain, and the man in the photograph might hold the answers they never wanted me to find. I sat back and let the realization wash over me. Everything about the last 27 years began rearranging itself into a new shape. Derek's constant resentment, Blake's easy cruelty, Linda's silent discomfort, the feeling that no matter how hard I tried, I would never belong to them. Maybe I did not. Maybe I never had. I placed the items carefully back in the box, but held on to the photograph. As painful as the discovery was, it also felt like a thread pulling me toward a truth no one had allowed me to see. And if Derek and Blake were willing to expose me with a stolen DNA test, then I needed to know the real story behind their hatred. The answers had been buried by my mother's fear. Now they needed to be unearthed by my courage. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting in the staff lounge eating a granola bar I barely tasted. My wrist still ached from Blake's grip, and the photograph I had found the night before sat folded inside my locker, where I checked at every break as if the man might suddenly reveal his name. I told myself not to think about the DNA test Blake forced on me. Told myself it was probably some cheap online kit he ordered to humiliate me. But deep down, I already knew he would not have gone through the trouble unless he was certain of the outcome. When my phone buzzed, I expected a reminder for a patient appointment or a message from a coworker. Instead, I saw the subject line staring back at me. "Your DNA results are ready." My stomach clenched. I hesitated long enough for someone to walk into the lounge, grab a soda, and leave again. Only then did I swipe open the message. The report loaded slowly, each bar inching across the screen, as if aware that it was about to detonate my entire life. When the first page appeared, the breath left my lungs. No genetic match found with the Thompson family reference samples. The words felt heavy, final, absolute in a way Derek's insults never were. It was not just that I was not related to Derek. It was that every person in that house who had treated me like an outsider was right about one thing. I did not share their blood. But the next line snapped my attention back into focus. Significant genetic matches found with Miller family records. A name appeared beside the percentage breakdown. Samuel Miller. My hands trembled as I scrolled. The report suggested a primary paternal relationship, though the database flagged him as deceased. The room tilted slightly as if the air pressure had shifted. I read the name again and again until it blurred. Samuel Miller. The man from the photograph had dark hair, kind eyes. A gentle hand resting on my mother's shoulder. Could that have been him? Could my mother have known the truth all along and spent her life trying to shield me from Derek's rage? I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. The pieces were beginning to connect. Derek's lifelong resentment suddenly made sense. The coldness, the aggression, the constant reminders that I was not enough. If he had known since I was a baby that I was not his daughter, then every insult he hurled at me had been rooted in bitterness and wounded pride. But why pretend? Why claim me legally if he despised the reminder of another man? I scrolled further. A summary note from the lab explained that my sample matched several extended relatives in the Miller family tree. Most lived out of state, but one line linked directly to a prominent businessman who had died 5 years ago. I remembered reading the name Miller Construction on building sites around Nashville when I was younger. My mother had worked part-time as a bookkeeper before she married Derek. Had she known Samuel from those early years? Had they been close enough that he was the man in the photograph? The more I stared at the report, the more the questions multiplied. Why had she written, "Forgive me"? Why had she hidden the birth record with no father listed? Why had she allowed Derek to raise me if she knew he would never treat me like his own grief twisted inside me sharp and unexpected? My mother had been my protector even in her silence, but now it felt as though she had left me a trail of secrets I was never meant to discover alone. A knock on the lounge door startled me. My coworker Jenna poked her head in. "Ava, you got a patient in room 4. She paused, eyebrows pulling together. "You okay?" "You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just tired. Be right there." After she left, I took one more breath and tucked the phone into my pocket. The shock still churned inside me, but under it, something else stirred. Not fear, not even anger. Resolve. If the DNA test was the weapon Blake intended to use against me, then I needed to know exactly what story he thought he could control. I spent the rest of my shift in a haze guiding ultrasound probes across bellies and shoulders, hearing heartbeats flicker across screens while my own heartbeat pounded in my ears. Each time I reached for the gel bottle, my mind returned to that single phrase: primary paternal relationship, Samuel Miller. By the time I clocked out that evening, the sun had dipped behind the hospital, leaving the sky streaked in pink and amber. I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel. The truth felt too big to hold alone and too dangerous to ignore. If Derek planned to cut me out of my mother's estate, he would use this DNA result as ammunition. But he had underestimated me. If the truth was shifting beneath my feet, then I needed someone who could help me navigate it. Someone who understood family law and the kind of abuse people like Derek hid behind closed doors. I opened my phone again and reread the last line of the report. "If you have questions about your results or wish to request extended lineage analysis, please contact a representative." I almost laughed. I did not need more data. I needed answers to questions that had been buried with my mother. I dialed the number of a lawyer I had searched earlier during my break, a woman named Helena Brooks, who specialized in inheritance disputes and domestic abuse cases. The kind of lawyer people hired when their families became battlegrounds. A calm voice answered. "This is Helena. How can I help you?" I swallowed hard. "My name is Ava Thompson, and I think my family is trying to erase me." There was a quiet pause, not of disbelief, but of understanding. "Come in tomorrow morning," she said. "Bring everything you have." When I hung up the phone, the fear that had chased me for 27 years shifted into something steadier. For the first time, I was choosing to step toward the truth instead of running from the damage it caused. Derek and Blake had started this war, but I was done fighting blind. The next morning, I woke before my alarm heart pounding, as if my body already knew the day would tilt something irreversible into motion. The sky outside my window was still blue-gray, that fragile in-between color that appears right before sunrise, and for a moment I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, clutching the photograph of my mother and the man I now believed was Samuel Miller. I whispered her name under my breath, as if she could whisper something back, some explanation for why she left me standing alone in a battlefield she knew existed long before I was born. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the Brooks Law Office, my nerves were taut enough to snap. The building was small and unassuming, wedged between a dentist office and a faded insurance agency, but the brass nameplate on the door glowed with a quiet authority. Helena Brooks, Attorney at Law. The lobby smelled of paper lavender and something warm that reminded me faintly of safety. A receptionist greeted me and asked me to sign in. My hands shook as I scribbled my name, not from fear, but from the realization that I was crossing a threshold my family never expected me to approach. After a few minutes, the receptionist waved me toward an office with an open door. Helena stood from behind her desk and extended her hand. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed but kind, with a composure that made me exhale for the first time all morning. "Ava," she said warmly. "Come in." Her office was lined with shelves of legal texts and neatly organized case files, the kind of controlled environment where chaos was something to be conquered, not endured. "Sit wherever you like." I sat in the chair across from her, words tangled in my throat, but she watched me with the patience of someone who had heard every version of family destruction and did not flinch. "Tell me everything," she said, and I did. I told her about the birthday humiliation, about Derek announcing another man's mistake like it was a toast. I told her about Blake handing me the DNA results with that triumphant smirk about how he cornered me in the hospital parking lot and squeezed my wrist hard enough to bruise. I told her about the box of my mother's belongings that photographed the birth record with the blank line beside father. I told her about the DNA email that confirmed what my entire life had already implied. Derek was not my father. The man in the photograph might be, and every cruel moment suddenly made sense. Helena took notes quickly, but precisely, her pen moving like someone connecting threads on a map. When I finished, she leaned back slowly. Ava, this is not just a family disagreement. This is a coordinated attempt to cut you out of your mother's estate. And from what you are telling me, it may also involve financial misconduct and domestic abuse. Hearing her say those words out loud sent a tremor through me. Abuse. I had spent most of my life pretending what happened behind the Thompson walls was just harsh parenting or bad moods or a difference in temperament. Giving it a name made it real, and that reality pulled tight around my chest. Helena continued, Derek cannot remove you from anything your mother legally left you. Biological relation to him is irrelevant. If the property was in her name and passed to her heirs, he cannot rewrite that simply because he dislikes the truth. I nodded slowly. He plans to try, though. I know he does. Helena tapped her pen against the desk. Has he sold anything yet? Has he withdrawn funds from joint accounts without notifying you? I hesitated. I do not know. I left before we could finish any discussions after my mother died. He shut me out of everything. Helena's expression sharpened. Then, step 1 is discovery. We will obtain financial statements and property documents through a formal request. Step 2 is building evidence of coercion and intimidation. The incident in the parking lot alone is grounds for a restraining order, especially since it happened on hospital property with cameras. That detail snapped into place like a puzzle piece. The camera. The footage. Blake had threatened me right beneath it. Do you think the hospital will release it? I asked. Helena nodded. If we request it formally or if law enforcement requests it. Threatening bodily harm is not something they ignore. The room felt warmer suddenly, not safe exactly, but possible, like the future had more than one path now. Helena folded her hands. There is something else we should discuss. Your DNA results. You said the likely biological father was a man named Samuel Miller. I felt my breath catch. Yes. He died 5 years ago, but the report shows a direct paternal match. That means legally you are entitled to know what he left behind and whether he acknowledged you in any way. My throat tightened. Could that matter for anything? Yes, she said gently. It could matter for everything. She reached for a folder and slid it toward me. Inside were forms and a checklist. I need you to gather every document you have, medical records showing past injuries that might support a pattern of abuse, old emails, texts, photos of the bruise on your wrist, anything from your childhood that proves Derek or Blake created a hostile environment. Domestic abuse cases often rely on patterns, not single incidents. My chest constricted at the word childhood, but I nodded. I can find things. There are letters I wrote to myself when I was younger, journals. Even my school counselor once reported concern about my home life. That could help tremendously, Helena said. The more evidence we compile, the stronger your case becomes. I let her words settle. Case, evidence, legal rights. For years, I believed I had none. Derek made sure of that. But now the truth was shifting, forcing me to see the cracks he never wanted exposed. Helena closed her notebook and gave me a level look. Ava, you have been surviving for a long time. Now it is time to start fighting back. I swallowed hard. What if Derek retaliates? He already made it clear he wants me out of everything. Helena's expression did not change. Then we will be ready. And this time, you will not be alone. I left her office with a stack of papers under my arm and a pulse beating fast beneath my bruised wrist. The world had not changed in the hour I spent inside those walls, but I had. For the first time since I was a child staring out a frosted window, praying someone would let me in, I felt a new truth settle under my skin. They could try to erase me. They could try to scare me. They could even try to rewrite the past, But the moment I stepped into Helena's office, I stopped being the Thompson family's victim and became something they never expected, someone who could fight back. The next step felt heavier than anything I had done, so far heavier even than reading the DNA results, or admitting to Helena that my childhood had been painted in shades of cruelty no one outside the Thompson house ever witnessed. If I wanted the truth, I had to follow the threads my mother left behind, and one of those threads led to a woman named June Whitaker, my mother's closest friend, before Derek systematically pushed everyone out of her life. June had moved to the outskirts of town years ago after her husband died, and I remembered her only as a warm presence who smelled like cinnamon and always tucked loose hair behind my ear when she visited. She disappeared from our lives when I was around 11, though at the time I did not understand why adults drifted away the moment Derek grew tense around them. All I knew was that her absence felt like losing another piece of my mother. I called her that afternoon. Her voice on the other end trembled, slightly fragile, but alive. "Ava," she said after I introduced myself. "My goodness, I wondered if you would ever reach out." There was something in her tone that made my chest tighten, a knowing softness I had not felt since my mother's arms. I asked if she had time to meet. She agreed without hesitation. I drove to her small, cream-colored house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood lined with oak trees that cast long shadows across cracked sidewalks. Children's bikes lay scattered across lawns, wind chimes tinkled from porches, and everything felt like a version of childhood I had never received. June opened the door before I knocked twice. Her silver hair fell in soft waves, and her eyes widened with a grief that seemed to have waited years to be spoken. "Ava," she whispered and pulled me into a gentle hug. For a moment, I allowed myself to sink into it. The scent of cinnamon clung to her sweater just as I remembered. We moved to her living room, a warm space filled with mismatched cushions and framed photographs of people who looked genuinely happy, the kind of room my mother would have loved. June watched me with cautious tenderness. "You look so much like her," she said. I swallowed the sudden ache rising in my throat. "I found something in my mother's box yesterday," I said. "Something I think you might understand better than I do." I handed her the photograph. Her fingers trembled as she traced the edge of it. "I remember this day," she murmured. "Laura was terrified when this picture was taken. Terrified but hopeful, too." My pulse quickened. June looked up, eyes shining. "She never told you, did she?" June's voice cracked at the edges. "She wanted to. She tried. But Derek made it impossible." I leaned forward. "Please," I said, "I need to know everything." June took a slow breath and set the photo gently on her lap. "Your mother met Samuel Miller long before she married Derek. They grew up in the same county. She worked for his family's company doing bookkeeping while she saved for college. They fell in love quickly. Everyone who knew them thought they were meant to be. But then she met Derek. His charm fooled her in the beginning. He had a way of overwhelming a room and making people believe he was strength and flesh. But he was jealous from the start. Jealous of Samuel. Jealous of your mother's independence." I blinked. I cannot imagine her being drawn to Derek. June shook her head. "He was different then, or at least he pretended to be. When your mother realized she was pregnant with you, she went to tell Samuel. She believed he deserved to know, but Derek found out first." My breath caught. How June's expression darkened. Derek intercepted a letter she had written. He confronted her and threatened her with things I have never repeated out loud. He said if she left him for Samuel, he would make sure Samuel suffered for it. And she believed him because by then she already knew what he was capable of. The room felt colder even though sunlight streamed through the lace curtains. My hands grew numb. The idea that my mother had lived in fear at the hands of the man who raised me should not have surprised me, but hearing it confirmed unraveled something tight in my chest. What did he do? June looked away. He confronted Samuel behind the Miller construction site one evening. There was a physical altercation. Samuel left Tennessee within days. He did not want Laura hurt. And Derek made it clear that if Samuel stayed, the consequences would be severe. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to weep. But all I could manage was a whispered, "So he ran." June shook her head firmly. "No, dear. He left because he loved her, because Derek's rage was unpredictable. Because your mother begged him to go. She tried to protect you even before you were born. The idea pierced through me like a shard of glass. And my mother stayed with Derek. She married him even though she loved Samuel. June nodded. She thought she could endure him as long as he left Samuel and you alone. She hoped marriage would calm him. She never expected his resentment to last decades. The truth settled into place with brutal clarity. Derek had hated me not because I reminded him of anything I did wrong, but because I reminded him of everything he could not control. He hated me for existing as proof of her heart belonging elsewhere. I stared at the photograph again, seeing it through new eyes. My mother's smile, Samuel's gentle stance, the quiet tenderness in the way he stood beside her. There was love there. Love Derek had tried for years to erase. June reached out and covered my hand with hers. Your mother fought for you in every way she could. She kept this picture even though Derek warned her never to speak Samuel's name again. She hid parts of herself to protect you. I felt my voice tremble. Why did she write "forgive me"? June sighed. Because she knew one day the truth might reach you, and she knew that truth would cut deep. She wanted you to understand she did the best she could while trapped in a life she tried desperately to escape. I nodded slowly as pieces of my life rearranged themselves with devastating clarity. For the first time, I saw my childhood not as a series of personal failures, but as collateral damage of my mother's impossible choices. I stayed with June a little longer listening as she shared softly guarded stories about my mother, how she laughed easily before Derek, how she hummed while organizing bookshelves, how she wanted a daughter to pass her strength to. When I finally stepped outside, the sky had shifted to late afternoon gold, casting long shadows across June's porch. I held the photograph against my chest. My mother had tried to protect me from Derek's hatred. Samuel had tried to protect her. And now, the truth that they had both feared, both buried, both sacrificed so much to contain, was rising to the surface no matter who wanted to keep it hidden. I walked to my car with a new fire burning quietly inside me. The past had been weaponized against me for 27 years. But now that I had the truth, the next chapter would be written differently. The call came just after sunset while I was driving home from June's house, the photograph resting on the passenger seat as if it were a person riding beside me. My mind kept cycling through every detail June revealed, each truth folding into the next until the shape of my entire life looked different. I had barely begun to understand what any of it meant when my phone vibrated against the console. I glanced down. Unknown number, local area code. Something cold slid down my spine. I answered anyway, my voice unsteady. "This is Ava," a measured voice responded. "Miss Thompson, this is Attorney Carl Draper. I represent your father, Derek Thompson." The grip I had on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. I did not speak, did not breathe. Draper continued without pause. "I am calling to inform you that your father is requesting your presence at a meeting tomorrow morning to discuss updates to his estate plan." My heart stuttered. Estate plan? Updates? It sounded sterile and professional, nothing like the venom I knew Derek carried. What sort of updates, I asked. Draper's tone remained unnervingly neutral. "Your father would prefer to explain in person. The meeting will take place at 10 o'clock at Ridge and Moore Legal Group on Baxter Avenue. Attendance is mandatory for all involved heirs. Mandatory. Involved heirs." The phrasing felt deliberate, a warning and a threat woven together. I forced my voice steady, and if I decline, Draper paused just long enough to confirm my suspicion. "Your father instructed me to inform you that refusal will be taken as forfeiture." Forfeiture. The word hit like a punch. Derek was not just preparing to cut me out. He was daring me to challenge him. I inhaled slowly through my nose. "I will be there." "Very well," he said. "Please, arrive on time." The line clicked dead. I let the silence fill the car as the city lights blurred past my windshield. Forfeiture. Derek was escalating this faster than I expected. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and dialed Helena immediately. She answered on the second ring. "Ava, are you okay?" Her voice softened when she heard my breath shaking. "What happened?" I repeated the conversation word for word. Helena's tone darkened, shifting into the crisp authority she wore like armor. "That meeting is a trap," she said. "Derek is attempting to intimidate you into relinquishing your legal rights. He cannot force you to waive anything without documentation and explicit consent." She exhaled sharply. "And the fact that he is involving an estate attorney before any formal notice to you indicates he already has a plan to exclude you." My stomach tightened. "What should I do?" She did not hesitate. "You do not go anywhere alone. I will attend the meeting with you. Derek will not expect that. He thinks you are frightened. He expects compliance. We will give him neither." I closed my eyes and let her confidence steady me. Helena asked for more details, and I told her everything. The hostility in his tone, the veiled threat behind forfeiture, the strange finality in the phrase involved heirs. She hummed softly almost to herself. "This confirms it. He believes the DNA results undermine your legal claim. But they do not. He cannot erase you from anything that belonged to your mother. He can update his own will. He can distribute his personal property however he likes. But your mother's half of the marital estate is locked. You inherit from her, not him." My pulse slowed. "You are sure?" "Yes. His biology is irrelevant. You are her daughter. Tennessee law is absolute about this." I nodded even though she could not see me. Relief flickered briefly, but worry rose right behind it. Derek was relentless when cornered. If he was preparing this meeting, he believed he had leverage. Helena continued, "I want you to avoid contacting him or Blake until tomorrow. Do not engage with any messages. Do not step foot near their house. Anything you do could be twisted into agreement or consent. Let me do the speaking." She paused. "And Ava, be prepared. He will likely attempt something dramatic. Derek thrives on spectacle." That was the truest thing anyone had said about him. Growing up, Derek used humiliation like a tool. A glare in the grocery store, a raised voice at a school event, a threat disguised as a joke at a family barbecue. He never struck me in public, but he always made sure everyone understood who held the power. A will meeting gave him an audience, a stage. The perfect place to finally erase me in the only way he believed mattered. Helena's voice gentled. "But that spectacle will not go the way he plans. I promise you that." I arrived home minutes later, the sky darkening into a deep indigo. I carried the photograph and the box of my mother's belongings inside as if they were fragile sacred. They felt like anchors in a storm I did not choose but could no longer avoid. I set the photograph on the nightstand and stared at Samuel's face. His eyes held a warmth that cut through the cold Derek had built around me. June's words echoed again. "He left because he loved her. He left to protect you both." I traced the edge of the photograph. If Samuel had stayed, if my mother had not married Derek, if my life had unfolded under different hands, who would I be? Would I have known gentleness? Would I have known safety? Would I have known myself? The questions were impossible, but one truth had formed with burning clarity. Whatever happened at the meeting tomorrow, I would not sit silent. Not again. Not ever. I took out my phone and photographed the bruise Blake left on my wrist from every angle. Helena would need it. Then I documented the birth record with no father listed, the envelope, the photograph. Everything that proved my existence had never belonged to the man who spent 27 years reminding me I was nothing to him. When I finally lay down, sleep did not come. My thoughts looped through every moment of my childhood, every insult, every door slammed in my face. And beneath all of it pulsed a hope so fragile, I barely dared acknowledge it. Samuel Miller might have wanted me. My mother might have loved someone gentle. And tomorrow, for the first time in my life, I would not walk into Derek Thompson's world as a powerless daughter. I would walk in with truth on my side, and with someone willing to fight for me. The next morning, the air felt thick before I even stepped outside, as if the world already knew the confrontation brewing at 10 o'clock would not end quietly. I dressed in plain slacks and a soft navy blouse, nothing remarkable but enough to remind myself I was not the trembling child Derek had spent years trying to mold. Helena met me in the parking lot of Ridge and Moore Legal Group, her expression calm but sharpened with purpose. She greeted me with a nod instead of small talk, the kind of acknowledgement that conveyed we were stepping onto a battlefield together. Inside, the firm felt cold and modern, all glass walls and polished stone floors that echoed faint footsteps. A receptionist directed us to a conference room down the hallway. I felt the blood in my body thrum with every step. Derek and Blake were already there when we entered. Derek sat at the head of the long table like he had been rehearsing for this moment his entire life. His shoulders were squared, his jaw tight, a satisfied smirk tugging the corner of his mouth. Blake leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, confidence radiating off him in waves. The bruise he left on my wrist pulsed under my sleeve. Derek did not stand when Helena and I walked in. He did not even pretend civility. He glanced at her, then at me. "So you brought a lawyer," he said. His voice held mock disappointment. "I see how it is." Helena gave a brief smile that carried the quiet threat of someone who had won cases nastier than this one. "Mr. Thompson," she said calmly. "Good morning. We are here to ensure this meeting proceeds lawfully." Derek snorted. "Lawfully." The word sounded sour coming from him. He leaned back, placing both hands on the arms of his chair. "This is a family matter." "It is not." Helena corrected. "Not anymore." Derek ignored her and focused on me. "Sit down, Ava. Let us get this over with." I sat though every nerve in my body warned me to stay standing. A middle-aged attorney with a thinning hairline entered the room, then carrying a thick folder. He cleared his throat. "Good morning. My name is Mr. Lawrence. I am handling the drafting of the updated will as requested by Mr. Thompson." Blake straightened. Derek smirked. Helena's eyes narrowed slightly. "We will begin," Lawrence said. "Mr. Thompson has chosen to revise his estate plan due to new circumstances." He began flipping through the documents as if reading them for the first time, though Derek's smug posture made clear this was all pre-planned. Derek stood abruptly pacing behind Lawrence. As you all know, he began tone loud enough to rattle the windows. "There have been certain revelations about Ava that make continuing the old estate plan impossible." My stomach turned. Revelations. He was referring to the DNA results Blake stole and weaponized. Derek continued, raising his voice. "Ava is not my blood, never has been, and after long consideration I see no reason she should inherit anything of mine." Blake smirked with open triumph. Helena leaned forward, hands folded. "Mr. Thompson," she said calmly, "biological relation to you has no impact on Ava's legal right to her mother's estate." Derek slammed his fist down on the table. "I am not talking about Laura's estate," he roared. "I am talking about mine. My property, my accounts, my house, everything I worked for." He glared at me. "You walked out. You abandoned this family. And someone like you, someone who is not even a real Thompson, does not deserve a cent." The room held its breath. I forced myself to meet his eyes, refusing to shrink. Helena's voice remained steady, though steel threaded through it. "Again, Mr. Thompson, you may distribute your personal property however you wish, but anything that belonged to Laura or was obtained during the marriage cannot be reassigned without legal grounds." Derek huffed. "Then maybe we will establish some." Blake stepped forward suddenly, slapping a stack of papers onto the table in front of Lawrence. "Dad and I have been gathering evidence," he said. "Ava has not contributed to the house in years." She moved away. She abandoned her responsibility. "The house is ours." Lawrence cleared his throat awkwardly, reading the papers Blake shoved at him. "This does not constitute legal grounds for disinheritance regarding Laura's portion." Derek rounded the table until he stood behind me. His shadow fell across my shoulder. "You think you can run to a lawyer and hide behind the law?" he growled. "You think that makes you safe. This is my house. My family, and if you had any decency, you would walk away from all of it." Something inside me snapped. Years of swallowing my voice, years of shrinking small so Derek's rage had less to hit, years of believing their cruelty was somehow my fault. Not anymore. I turned my head slightly. "You humiliated me in front of everyone last night. You let Blake assault me in a parking lot. And now you expect me to pretend you have the right to erase me." Derek's face twisted. "Assault," he scoffed. "He barely touched you." Helena's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Actually, Mr. Thompson, the incident is recorded on hospital security footage. I filed a preservation request this morning. Blake paled. Derek froze mid-breath. Helena continued, and if necessary, we will pursue a restraining order and criminal charges. Blake stepped forward with a sneer. You cannot do that. You have no proof. Helena tilted her head. The bruise on Ava's wrist says otherwise. I lifted my arm and pulled back my sleeve. The purple mark, dark and clear, glared back at them. Derek's mouth shut abruptly. The attorney, Lawrence, cleared his throat once more, now visibly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should pause to clarify the legal limitations here. Derek spun toward him. No. We continue. He pointed at me like he was pointing at a stain. I want her out. I want the paperwork ready today. She gets nothing. Nothing. Helena leaned back in her chair. You are welcome to attempt that. But it will not hold, and you risk exposing financial misconduct that may already be under investigation. Derek blinked. What misconduct? Helena smiled faintly. You would know better than I would. Would you care to continue under oath? Derek stepped back as if she had struck him. His fury faltered, replaced by something I had never seen in him. Fear. Real fear. For a moment, the room fell silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Blake looked between us with dawning uncertainty. Derek tried to regain control. This meeting is over, he snapped. I will not be lectured in my own estate meeting. He stormed toward the door, but just before he exited, he turned back long enough to spit out a final declaration. This is not finished, Ava, not by a long shot. Then the door slammed, rattling the glass. Blake followed quickly, his earlier triumph dissolved into something tight and cornered. Lawrence stared at the papers on the table as if they might combust. Helena exhaled slowly. And just like that, she murmured. Derek confirmed, he is hiding something. I felt the tension drain from my body all at once. My hands shook beneath the table. Helena touched my arm gently. You did well. Very well. I swallowed hard. What happens now? She gave a small, knowing smile. Now Derek shows his next move. And when he does, we will finally see the truth he has spent 27 years trying to bury. I did not expect the phone to ring before sunrise the next morning, or for Helena's voice to carry a weight I had never heard from her before, a gravity that told me even before she spoke that something irreversible had happened. Ava, she said quietly. Are you sitting down? I was still tangled in my blanket, disoriented from a night of restless dreams. My heart lurched. What is it? She inhaled. Your father passed away last night. A stroke. Sudden. The room tilted, but not in grief. The sensation was stranger, as if my body did not know how to respond to the death of a man who had never been a father to me. I rubbed my forehead, trying to process the words. What happens now? I asked finally. There is more, Helena said, voice tightening. Derek left a sealed envelope with his attorney to be opened only after his death. It contains instructions and documents he did not want revealed while he was alive. You need to be at Ridge and Moore in an hour. My pulse hammered. An envelope. A secret he protected even from Blake. A truth he wanted to hide until he was beyond consequences. I dressed quickly, my movements stiff and mechanical. When I stepped outside, dawn had barely broken the sky, a pale gray that felt fitting for the moment. I arrived at the legal office just before 7. Helena was already waiting near the entrance, her posture composed, but her eyes alert, as if she anticipated the situation was more explosive than anyone yet understood. Inside the conference room, the attorney Lawrence appeared unsettled. His voice strained as he gestured to a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. This was left in my care last week, he said. Mr. Thompson instructed me to open it only upon confirmation of his death. Helena exchanged a glance with me before nodding for him to proceed. Lawrence sliced the seal with a letter opener. Papers slid out, several stapled, some handwritten, some printed on formal legal letterhead. He read silently at first, eyes widening slowly. After a few moments, he cleared his throat. It appears your father kept extensive records regarding both you and Blake. The tension in my chest tightened. Records of what Lawrence lifted the top sheet. According to this statement, Mr. Thompson has known for 25 years that you were not his biological daughter. He discovered it after intercepting correspondence from your mother and later confirming it privately. My breath hitched. He knew. All those years of humiliation, resentment, cruelty. He knew and still chose to raise me while punishing me for a truth he kept hidden. Lawrence continued. He writes here that he initially intended to divorce your mother after the discovery, but refrained because, quote, she was too fragile and I could not risk losing the house in the process. Anger flared in me sharp and searing, but Helena placed a grounding hand on my arm. There is more, Lawrence said, his voice dipping lower as he read. Mr. Thompson hired a private investigator 2 years ago when he suspected Blake was withdrawing money from his retirement and business accounts without authorization. Helena's eyebrows lifted. That aligns with certain financial discrepancies we suspected. Lawrence picked up another page. The investigator provided Derek with detailed reports confirming that Blake had embezzled nearly $40,000 in small transactions over the course of 18 months. I stared at the table, gripping the arm of my chair. Blake. Always the golden boy. Always the one Derek protected, yet he was stealing from him behind his back. Why did my father not confront him? Lawrence flipped to another page. According to the notes, Mr. Thompson planned to confront Blake and cut him out of his will. But then your departure from the house shifted his priorities. He believed you might seek a legal claim to your mother's estate. He panicked. Panicked. The man who spent decades acting as if he controlled every breath I took panicked at the idea of losing property he never earned. Lawrence continued reading. Mr. Thompson wrote that Blake grew increasingly aggressive, blaming Ava's existence for every financial problem, and at one point suggested forcing her to sign away her rights. Derek feared the situation might escalate. Helena leaned forward abruptly. Fear of escalation. Did he specify what Blake threatened? Lawrence nodded grimly. Yes. He feared Blake might resort to physical harm to ensure Ava complied. My stomach dropped. Helena's jaw clenched. Is there evidence of that? Lawrence handed her a small packet of printed text messages. One look at Helena's expression told me everything. Blake threatening to handle Ava permanently. Derek warning him not to cross a line. References to my leaving the house. References to the estate. References to violence. My breath came shallow and uneven. Helena steadied me with a hand on my shoulder. There is something else, Lawrence said, pulling out a handwritten letter. This was addressed specifically to you. My heart stopped. For me, Lawrence cleared his throat and read aloud. Ava. If you are hearing this, I am already gone. I kept too many secrets. I should have told you years ago. The truth is, I never deserved to raise you. Not because of who your real father was, but because I let my pride turn me into a man your mother feared. She begged me not to tell you the truth. She said she wanted you to grow up without shame. But the shame was mine. I knew I could never give you what Samuel would have, and I blamed you for that. I blamed an innocent child. There are 2 things you must know. First, I saw Blake becoming worse than me. I saw the rage in him, the greed, the willingness to hurt you. I hired a private investigator so that if he ever laid a hand on you again, there would be evidence to protect you. Second, your mother never stopped loving you. She died wishing she could undo every moment you spent believing her silence meant she did not care. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not even deserve it. But I need you to know I tried in the end to stop Blake from hurting you, even if I failed. The letter ended abruptly as if Derek had run out of words or courage. I sat motionless, torn between rage and a grief I did not understand. Derek's cruelty shaped my entire life, yet hearing even a shadow of remorse from him created a fracture inside me I was not prepared to face. Helena exhaled slowly. This changes everything, legally and emotionally. She turned to Lawrence. We will need copies of all documents, immediately. Of course, he said. Blake will be notified as well, though I expect he will not take this well. Helena's eyes hardened. That is an understatement. I rose from my chair feeling unsteady but strangely lighter. The truth, as devastating as it was, had finally surfaced, and with it came something I had never expected to feel. Power. The truth no longer belonged to Derek. It belonged to me. And now Blake would face the consequences Derek had tried too late to prevent. I left the law office with the envelope pressed to my chest as if it contained a heartbeat, as if the pages inside were warm from the life they described. Derek's confession still echoed in my head, each line cutting deep and yet stitching together truths I had lived with unknowingly for years. But nothing could have prepared me for the next call that came less than 3 hours later, a call that would shift the foundation of everything I believed about where I came from. I had barely returned home when my phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number, but something inside me whispered to answer. "This is Ava." A gentle but professionally measured voice responded. "Miss Thompson, my name is Rebecca Collins. I'm an attorney with Miller and Grant representing the estate of the late Samuel Miller." My breath caught. The name settled over my skin like a soft current. Samuel Miller, the man whose eyes I shared, the man my mother had loved, the man Derek had driven away. I sank slowly onto the couch. "Why are you calling me Rebecca?" Hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words with immense care. "We received confirmation this morning through the central DNA registry that you match the Miller family line. The estate trustee has instructed us to reach out immediately. There is a directive left by Mr. Miller prior to his passing, one that concerns you." My pulse thundered in my ears. A directive for me. But he never knew me. He left before I was born. "How could he?" Rebecca continued. "Samuel Miller believed you were his daughter. He never had definitive proof at the time, but he left documentation expressing his belief and his desire to ensure that you were cared for should anything happen to him." I closed my eyes, feeling years of yearning rise to the surface, raw and dangerous. What kind of documentation? Rebecca's voice softened. A trust fund, a property deed, and a personal letter. I covered my mouth with my hand, holding back a sound that wasn't quite a sob but wasn't steady breath either. "When can I see them?" I asked. "This afternoon, if possible. I'll have everything prepared. I'll be there." I hung up and sat frozen for a long time, staring at the wall, while my heart tried to fit this new truth into the space left behind by Derek's deathbed confession. Samuel Miller believed I was his daughter, and he left something behind for me. Not out of guilt, not out of legal obligation, but out of love he never got to show. When I finally stood, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I drove across the city through a blur of traffic lights until I reached the Miller and Grant office. It was nothing like Derek's legal firm. Warm wood paneling, soft light, cushioned chairs, fresh flowers on every table. A place built for comfort, not intimidation. Rebecca greeted me in the lobby, a woman in her mid-40s with intelligent eyes and a calm presence. She led me into a private office where a leather folder sat on the desk. "Before we begin," she said, "I want you to know that Samuel spoke often of what he hoped your life would become. He regretted deeply that he could not be a part of it." My chest tightened. "You knew him?" Rebecca nodded. "I worked with him for almost 10 years. He was a good man, a gentle one. And the way he talked about your mother, it was clear he never stopped loving her." Tears blurred my vision, unexpected and overwhelming. Rebecca opened the folder. Inside were documents neatly arranged, trust papers, notarized statements, financial disclosures. Samuel had created a trust worth a significant amount enough to secure a future I had never dared imagine. He had also left a property deed, a small house on the outskirts of Nashville. Fully paid off. I stared at it in disbelief. "He bought a house for me?" Rebecca nodded. "He purchased it about 6 months before he passed. He said it was for a young woman who will one day need a place that is hers and hers alone." My throat constricted. I reached for the last item in the folder, a sealed envelope, my name written on the front in careful handwriting. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter yellowing around the edges. I began to read. "Ava, if fate is kind, this letter will reach you one day. If it does, then I want you to know the truth. Your mother never had the chance to tell. I loved her. From the first moment I saw her, I knew she was the kindest soul I had ever met. When she told me she was pregnant, I thought my life was finally beginning. But circumstances I could not control forced me to leave. I left because staying would have put you both in danger, not because I did not want to be your father. Not a day went by that I did not think of you. I imagined your first steps, your first words, your first day of school. I hoped you would inherit her strength, her soft heart, and her unbreakable spirit. If you are reading this now, then I hope you know that you were loved long before you knew my name. This house is my gift to you. It is not payment. It is not compensation. It is something I would have given you if I had been allowed in your life. My greatest wish is that you find peace, safety, and a life free from the shadows of the past. With all my heart, Samuel, I pressed the letter to my chest and let myself cry openly, quietly, without shame. It wasn't grief. It wasn't pain. It was something gentler, something fierce. For the first time, I felt the presence of a father, not in memory, not in fear, but in love. Rebecca waited with respectful silence until I found my voice again. He really wanted me. The words cracked as they left my throat. She nodded. More than you know. I left the office in a haze, hugging the folder as if it contained oxygen. Outside, the air felt warmer, brighter, the world strangely softened. For 27 years, I believed I came from nothing, that I was an accident resented by the man who raised me. But now I knew the truth. My mother loved me fiercely. My real father loved me quietly. And the man who tried to erase me had failed, entirely. I drove toward the small house Samuel had left me the address written in careful ink on the deed. As I turned onto the quiet street lined with maple trees and pastel homes, an unexpected feeling settled over me. Belonging. A life built on truth was waiting just beyond the next turn. The first sign that Blake was about to implode came 3 days after I received Samuel's letter. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, still absorbing the quiet peace of the home he left me when Helena called. Her voice carried that sharp calm she used whenever trouble was brewing. Ava Blake has officially filed a petition to claim full ownership of your mother's estate. I felt my stomach tighten, though I was not surprised. Blake had always believed the world owed him something. He had spent his entire life feeding on Derek's approval like a parasite, and now that Derek was gone, Blake was clawing for control of anything that remained. What are his grounds? I asked, already knowing the answer. The usual, she said. He claims you are not biologically related to Derek and therefore have no standing to inherit anything tied to the Thompson household. He is also accusing you of manipulating Derek during his final months. A sound left my mouth, low and bitter. Blake accusing anyone of manipulation was like a wolf accusing a sheep of being dangerous. Helena continued, but he made a critical mistake. He filed without probable cause. In Tennessee, abusing the court system like that carries consequences. I leaned back in my chair. You mean he just dug his own grave? I mean, we are about to hand the judge a shovel. The mandatory mediation hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. During those 2 weeks, Blake escalated. He sent texts filled with thinly veiled threats. You'll regret crossing me. I'll ruin your new life before it starts. And my favorite, dripping with entitlement. You should have just disappeared like Dad wanted. He never understood that everything he wrote or said to me was becoming evidence. Helena built the case brick by brick, starting with the footage from the hospital parking lot. The camera had captured the anger on Blake's face as clearly as it had captured his hand squeezing my arm hard enough to leave bruises. Then came the texts. Dozens of them, some threatening, some belittling. Some incoherent rants written late at night, fueled by the same rage that had driven him his entire life. But the centerpiece of the case came from the detective files Derek had compiled before he died. Derek, for all his cruelty, had spent the final months of his life watching Blake closely. He had documented everything. Withdrawals Blake made from his bank account while he was sick. Conversations Blake had with acquaintances about getting Dad out of the way. Attempts to push Derek into changing the will, all of which Derek had quietly recorded in handwritten notes. The detective's findings were damning. Blake had stolen thousands. Blake had harassed neighbors, leaving a trail of witnesses who were now willing to testify. Blake had attempted to forge Derek's signature on several documents, though badly enough that any handwriting analyst could spot the fraud. Helena placed these findings neatly into our case file. By the time the hearing arrived, Blake was already buried in evidence and just didn't know it yet. The courthouse hallway buzzed with everyday cases. Couples arguing, families whispering, lawyers pacing while reviewing paperwork. Helena stood beside me, posture straight, presence cool and unshakable. When Blake arrived, he looked nothing like the confident bully who had been so eager to push me around. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. He wore a cheap suit he had probably borrowed, and his new attorney looked like he regretted every minute of representing him. Blake avoided my gaze at first, but after a few seconds, his expression hardened into hatred. "You ruined everything," he muttered as he passed me. Helena stepped between us before I could respond. "Keep walking, Mr. Thompson." The mediation room felt smaller than it should have. Blake sat across from us, tapping his foot wildly under the table. His attorney asked the judge to consider Blake's claim first. He made a passionate speech about family betrayal and fraud and undue influence. It was dramatic, but flimsy. When he finished, Helena opened our file. Everything she did was precise, controlled, devastating. She began with the footage from the hospital parking lot. The moment the judge saw Blake gripping my arm, her expression shifted from neutral to stone. Then Helena introduced the text messages, each one a nail in the coffin Blake had built himself. Threats, insults, admissions, screenshots projected one after another. Blake shrank further into his chair. Next came the detective's report, unauthorized withdrawals, evidence of attempted will manipulation, statements from witnesses who swore Blake had spoken about wanting Derek out of the way. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Thompson, were you aware these records existed?" Blake stuttered, his voice cracking. "That stuff is fake. My dad hated her. He wrote this to help me." Helena slid forward the original notes in Derek's handwriting. The judge examined them closely. Finally, Helena delivered the final blow. Derek's written directive that Blake was to be investigated if he harmed me. That note landed like a hammer. The room fell silent. Blake's face drained of all color as he realized Derek had turned on him long before Blake tried to turn on me. The judge leaned back. "Mr. Thompson, your petition is dismissed immediately." She didn't stop there. Given the overwhelming evidence of harassment, intimidation, and attempted financial abuse, the court is issuing a restraining order. You are to have no contact with Miss Thompson for 3 years. Additionally, you will repay the funds withdrawn from your father's accounts. And due to the severity of your actions, a criminal inquiry into assault and financial misconduct will proceed. Blake's attorney closed his eyes as if absorbing a blow. Blake erupted. "This is all her fault. She was never part of this family. She stole everything. Everything." But his voice was cracking, breaking, exposed. Security escorted him out while he continued shouting, though no one was listening anymore. Within a month, everything collapsed for him. His job terminated him after the restraining order became public record. His wife packed her things and left with their children. His home went up for sale to repay what he owed. For the first time in his life, Blake faced consequences, real ones, and none of them came from me. They came from the truth he had spent decades avoiding. I watched it unfold from a distance, not with joy, not with vengeance, but with a deep, quiet acceptance. Blake had written his own ending. All I had done was stop protecting him from it. The morning I moved into the house Samuel left me, I woke before sunrise as if some part of me understood that my life was resetting itself and did not want to miss a single second. The air outside was cool, perfumed with dew and early autumn leaves, and for the first time in years, I felt something in my chest loosen like a tight knot, finally beginning to unravel. The house sat on a quiet street just outside Nashville. A single-story home with pale blue siding and a wide front porch that looked like it had waited decades for someone to sit on it with a cup of coffee. I stood in the driveway with the keys in my hand, staring at the small brass tag that read Miller Residence. My name was not on it yet, but one day it would be. One day I would not feel like I was stepping into a stranger's story. I would feel like I was stepping into my own. I unlocked the door slowly, half expecting something heavy to hit me the way grief used to ambush me in the old house. But all that greeted me was silence. Not the cold silence of Derek's home, not the silence that followed threats or insults or the slam of a door. This silence felt warm, like an exhale, like a room finally allowed to breathe. The floors creaked under my feet as I walked through the hallway, sunlight filtering through the curtains in soft, golden lines. Everything smelled faintly of pine and old books. The living room was small but bright, with a brick fireplace that looked like it had been the heart of many quiet nights. I imagined Samuel sitting there once, maybe reading or thinking, or wondering about the daughter he could not hold. That thought made my throat tighten. I set my boxes down and took a long breath. This was my home now. A place untouched by Derek's anger or Blake's entitlement. A place untouched by guilt or fear. A place untouched by the version of myself who always flinched around loud voices. I opened the windows to let the morning air in. The curtains rustled gently like someone brushing past me. Outside, a small backyard stretched behind the house, overgrown with weeds but still beautiful. Wildflowers pushed through cracks in the stones. A neglected garden bed curved along the fence as if waiting patiently for someone who cared enough to tend it. I walked outside and knelt in the dirt, letting the soil run between my fingers. For the first time in my life, nothing and no one was pulling me in two directions. No one was demanding that I choose between survival and peace. No one was telling me who I was supposed to be. When I finished exploring the yard, I went back inside and unpacked slowly. I placed the framed ultrasound photo I kept in my locker at work on the kitchen shelf. I hung up my mother's scarf in the closet, even though it still carried a faint scent of her perfume. I set Samuel's watch box on the fireplace mantel unopened since the day I first took the watch out. The house felt different with each object I placed inside it, as though my presence was stitching itself into the walls. By noon, the movers had delivered the last of my furniture. After they left, I ordered a second-hand upright piano I had found online the week before. Music had been something my mother loved deeply, something Derek always mocked as useless. I had stopped playing long ago because every note reminded me of how quickly joy could be criticized in that house. But now in this space I wanted to feel it again. When the piano arrived, it barely fit through the doorway, and the delivery men cursed under their breath as they maneuvered it into the living room. But once it settled against the wall, it felt like it belonged there. Later that evening, I sat down in front of it, running my fingers across the keys. The sound that emerged was slightly out of tune, but warm, familiar, safe. I played one of the simple songs my mother used to hum while cooking dinner, my voice catching halfway through. The grief I expected did not come the way it used to. Instead, something else bloomed in its place. Something gentler. Something like healing. As the sun began to set, the living room filled with orange light. I made tea and took it out to the porch, curling up on the swing that had probably been there since the house was built. Across the street, children rode bicycles, their laughter echoing through the quiet evening. A dog barked. A neighbor waved as she walked by. For the first time in 27 years, I felt what normal could look like. Not survival, not vigilance, not endurance, just living, just being. I thought about the past months. Derek's humiliation, Blake's threats, the DNA results that pulled the truth out of the dark, the detective files, the courtroom, Samuel's letter, and finally, the house. My house. If trauma had taught me anything, it was that healing never arrives all at once. It arrives in moments, in breaths, in small choices. Moving into this home was one of those choices. And as I watched the sun dip behind the trees, painting the sky in gold and muted rose, I knew that this chapter of my life was not built from what I escaped. It was built from what I chose. Peace over chaos, boundaries over fear, a future over a past that never loved me properly. When twilight settled, I stepped back inside, turned on a single lamp near the piano, and let the soft light fill the room. I touched Samuel's watch on my wrist, feeling its steady weight. I whispered into the quiet room as if he might somehow hear me. I am okay now, and for the first time it was true. Linda showed up on a Thursday afternoon just as the sun dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the porch. I had spent the morning weeding the garden, letting the quiet rhythm of pulling roots help steady my thoughts, and was inside washing my hands when I heard the car door slam. It was a sharp, impatient sound, the same kind Derek used to make when he came home in a bad mood. My stomach tightened instinctively, a reflex I hated but still carried. I dried my hands slowly and stepped toward the window. Her old sedan sat crooked in my driveway as if she had parked in a hurry or never learned how to align herself anywhere properly. Linda stood beside it, wringing her hands, her eyes scanning the porch and front door with a nervous sort of hunger. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. The years had not been kind to her, and the past few weeks had clearly carved deeper lines across her face. I opened the door but did not step outside. Linda flinched at the sound of the hinges, then forced a trembling smile. "Ava, sweetheart, well, you look healthy." The compliment felt accidental, like something she had not practiced. I crossed my arms but kept my voice neutral. "What do you need, Linda?" Her smile wavered. "Could we talk inside?" "It's important." "No. Whatever you need to say it out here." A flicker of shame or frustration crossed her face. Then she stepped closer. "I want you to understand what Blake is going through. He's lost everything, his job, the house, his family. He's been staying with a friend, but that will not last." She hesitated. "He's in a very dark place, and I am scared for him." A familiar heat rose in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to disbelief. "So you came here to ask for my sympathy?" I asked. Linda swallowed. "No, I came because he needs help. You have the resources now. You could maybe offer some support until he gets back on his feet." Support. As if Blake had ever done a single thing in his life that resembled supporting someone else. I stared at her, searching her expression for any sign that she understood the damage she had allowed and encouraged. But I saw nothing, only desperation and denial. "So you want me to pay his debts?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Or give him a place to stay?" Linda's eyes softened in that pitying way she always used when she wanted something. "I know he made mistakes, but he is still your brother. Family sticks together." I almost laughed. After everything that had happened, after the bruises, the threats, the humiliation, the legal attacks, she still believed she could define the meaning of family for me. I stepped fully onto the porch, letting the screen door close behind me. "Linda, when have you ever seen Blake treat me like family?" Her mouth closed, then opened again. She seemed genuinely confused by the question. "He's had his struggles. His father was hard on him too. He is hurting." So was I. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I did not take them back. I was hurting every day in that house, and no one cared. Not you, not Derek, not Blake. Her face twisted with something like discomfort. "I tried my best. You know how Derek was. He had a temper." I stayed quiet to keep the peace. A short laugh escaped me, brittle and disbelieving. "Keeping the peace. Is that what you call it? When Blake shoved me down the porch steps when I was 12 and you told me to stop being dramatic? Or when Derek ripped the necklace my mother gave me and you pretended not to see? Or when Blake trapped me outside in the winter and you said boys will be boys?" Linda's chin trembled. I did not know what to do. "You were not my daughter. He would not have listened to me." "Then you should not have married him." The silence that followed was cold and heavy. Linda lifted a hand to her throat as if she had been slapped. I softened my tone, but not my stance. "I get it, Linda. You were afraid of Derek. You thought silence was safer. But silence has consequences, and one of those consequences is that you do not get to ask me for anything now." She blinked rapidly, tears pooling. "I am not asking for myself. Blake is my child. He is falling apart. He needs someone. He needs help." I stared at her quietly, letting her words settle. For years that line would have pierced me. Guilt was the language I had been raised to obey. But I was no longer that version of myself. I had outgrown the cage they built for me. Linda took a shaky breath. "You have a house. You have money now. Your real father left you enough to start over. You could share a little, after all we went through together." "We." The word struck deeper than the request. Linda had never once been on my side of anything. We did not go through anything together. I survived. She stood by. I stepped closer and spoke clearly, quietly, but with a firmness I had never allowed myself to use with her. I survived your silence. You watched Derek tear pieces of me down for years, and you watched Blake become him. You never stopped them. Not once. She flinched. Ava. I was doing what I thought was right. No, you were doing what was easiest, and that is why I owe you nothing. Her tears fell, then sliding down her cheeks. She looked at me as if she were seeing me for the first time, seeing the distance between the girl she once ignored and the woman now standing in front of her unshakable. Blake needs consequences, Linda. You protected him from them his entire life. I am not continuing that cycle. If he wants to rebuild, that is his responsibility, not mine. Linda opened her mouth again, but I gently shook my head. This conversation is over. I turned and reached for the door. She spoke one last trembling sentence. So that is it. You are turning your back on us. I paused, my hand on the handle, sunlight catching the dust in the air between us. No, I am turning my back on the people who turned theirs on me. Then I stepped inside and closed the door. There was no shouting, no banging, just a soft, defeated silence on the other side. For the first time in my life, closing a door did not feel like loss. It felt like freedom. The house was quiet the evening I finally allowed myself to open all the windows and let the late summer breeze drift through each room. The air smelled faintly of warm earth and blooming jasmine from the yard, and as I walked from room to room, I felt a softness in my chest that once would have frightened me. Peace had always felt temporary in the Thompson household, something that could be shattered by the slam of a door or the rise of Derek's voice. Now it felt like something earned, something chosen. I made tea as the sky shifted to a dusky lavender, then carried my mug to the small study at the back of the house. The room had once belonged to Samuel, lined with shelves that still held some of his old books. I ran my fingers across their spines the same way I had done the day I moved in, imagining him selecting each one, picturing him wondering whether someday I might hold them in my hands. Samuel had lived an entire life without being able to claim me. Yet in the end, he had given me something no one else ever had, a place where I belonged, without needing to earn it. I sat at the desk and opened the drawer where I kept his letter. The paper had softened at the edges from how many times I had read it. I traced his handwriting slowly, letting each word anchor me the way they had from the moment I first held them. He had written with hope, with regret, with a love that never had the chance to breathe in the open, a love I had spent most of my life believing did not exist for me. I rested my hand over my heart, where the watch he left me lay against my skin. Its ticking had become a comfort in the quiet moments, whispering that my life belonged to me now. Outside, the porch swing creaked slightly in the wind. I stood and walked to the window overlooking the backyard. The garden, once overgrown and tangled, now held rows of neat soil and small green shoots reaching upward toward the last light of the day. I worked hard to make it grow day after day, turning weeds into possibility. It was not lost on me that I was doing the same with myself. Healing was not a single moment. It was a season, a rhythm, a slow and stubborn reclaiming. It was allowing the child I once was to unclench her fists and believe the worst was truly over. I stepped outside and sat on the porch swing, watching as fireflies began to flicker across the yard. Their small bursts of light reminded me of breath of life, of tiny miracles I had never stopped wishing for, even when I had convinced myself hope was pointless. For 27 years, I lived in a house where love was conditional and cruelty was casual. A house where my worth rose and fell based on Derek's pride or Blake's resentment. I had learned to shrink then, to keep my voice low, to walk softly, to survive. But survival is not living. And I finally understood the difference. The sky darkened into a rich navy blue, and stars emerged one by one. I could hear faint laughter from a house down the street, and instead of feeling like an outsider, I felt connected. Part of a world I was finally choosing to step into. I thought about the viewers who might one day hear this story, people far from Tennessee, but close to their own battles. People who had been overlooked, mistreated, dismissed, or ignored by the families meant to protect them. People like me. I imagined speaking to them not with bitterness, but with the steady voice I had earned through fire. Blood does not decide family. Choice does. Love does. Courage does. The willingness to break a cycle does. I sipped my tea and let the warmth settle inside me. When I thought of Derek now, I felt a strange and unexpected neutrality. He had been a man shaped by anger, by pride, by a fragile sense of masculinity he guarded through fear. He had never known how to love me because he had never learned how to love himself in the first place. That was not an excuse, but it was clarity, and clarity is freedom. When I thought of Blake, I felt nothing at all. He had become a reflection of Derek's failings molded by entitlement and cruelty. Losing everything was not punishment, it was consequence. And consequence is often the doorway some people need before they ever find the humility to change. Whether Blake would walk through that doorway was not my responsibility. Not anymore. As the stars brightened overhead, I whispered a quiet truth to myself, one I had waited my entire life to believe. I am enough, not because of what I endured or what I survived or even what I inherited. I am enough because I exist beyond the pain that tried to define me. The front porch creaked gently as I stood watching the lights from the neighbors' windows blink on one after another, creating a patchwork of warmth across the street. I imagined my mother beside me, her hand resting lightly over mine. I imagined Samuel standing a short distance away, smiling the way I pictured him smiling the first time he held me. Sometimes healing means giving yourself the love you never received. Sometimes healing means finally letting yourself believe you deserved it all along. I walked back inside and turned off the lights one by one, pausing before the fireplace where Samuel's watchbox rested. I touched the edge of it and felt gratitude swell inside me. For him, for my mother, for the woman I had become. When I climbed into bed, the room glowed softly from the street lamp outside, and for the first time in 27 years, I fell asleep without dread. No footsteps, no slammed doors, no raised voices. Only the steady, calming tick of Samuel's watch on my wrist. Tomorrow, I would plant more flowers in the garden. Tomorrow, I would take a walk by the lake. Tomorrow, I would choose myself again, and again, and again. This time, the life I was building was mine, and it was beautiful. If Ava's journey reminded you of your own battles with toxic family dynamics, or the moment you finally chose yourself, I want to hear from you. Comment your city so we can see how far stories of healing and justice can travel. And if you've ever had to build a new life after being torn down by the people who should have protected you, know this: you are not alone. Share your story below, subscribe for more powerful narratives, and let this community be the place where your voice is finally heard.